Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you today as part of the Remetify Coaching Program podcast.
It's good to be here.
Our mission is, well, it's always the same. We take these huge stacks of really dense, rigorous academic analysis, sometimes from different fields, and we boil them down.
We extract the precise, the actionable insights you need.
Exactly. It's a shortcut to being comprehensively well-informed on a topic without having to deal with that crushing information overload we all face.
And our mission today is particularly focused. We're here to run what the sources call a structural coherence test.
A coherence test. I like that.
Yeah, we're taking foundational claims from two major world religions, putting them right next to each other, and just seeing if their ultimate premises can logically coexist.
And that's exactly what we're doing. We are plunging right into one of the most foundational and, let's be honest, one of the most provocative theological topics out there. Eschatology.
The doctrine of final things.
The doctrine of final things. Today's deep dive is all about a comparative analysis. It's a very rigorous academic look at heaven in Christianity on one side and paradise, or Jannah, in Islam on the other.
And it's important to be clear, we're not just looking at aesthetics here. This isn't about, whose description of gardens is more beautiful.
No, not at all. We're using the final destination as a tool, almost like a structural blueprint, to analyze the entire theological system behind it.
The core question driving all the source material we looked at is, it's intense, and it's pretty much unavoidable once you frame it this way.
Which is?
If the ideas about the afterlife in Christianity and Islam are so radically different, and we'll get into just how different they are, specifically in what defines human fulfillment, what it means to be truly happy,
Right.
does that imply that they cannot possibly originate from the same truthful, consistent, divine source?
And that's the whole mission. This is a structural comparison. We're looking at what the final state, the telos, that ultimate purpose, what it reveals about the diagnosis of humanity and the actual nature of the God who is said to have revealed it.
Just really an intellectual test of divine consistency.
So to really get this, we have to start with the premise. Why eschatology? Why is the study of the end times the ultimate test?
Right, because to understand why this test works, you first have to establish why this doctrine, of all doctrines, is the ultimate measure of a religious system. The sources we read kept calling it the doctrinal stress test.
A stress test. That's a great term. But why is the end the most important part? You might think the creation story or maybe the moral law would be more revealing about a religion's core beliefs.
And that's a fair question, but think of it this way. The final state is the telos. It's the ultimate reason why humanity was made in the first place. If you want to know what a builder intended for a structure, you don't look at the pile of bricks at the beginning. You look at the finished house. The afterlife defines the intended completion of the human project.
So if the final states are fundamentally different,
then the whole blueprint must be fundamentally different from the very start.
I see.
Right.
So if you really want to understand what a religion truly thinks about, say, creation and salvation, you have to look at its ending, because that endpoint has to logically justify everything that came before it.
Precisely. A religion's view of the afterlife discloses its deepest convictions about four really critical interconnected areas.
Okay, let's break those down.
First, it tells you the ultimate nature of God. Is God primarily a being to be known and communed with, or a being to be obeyed for a reward?
The object versus the benefactor.
Exactly. Second, it reveals the fundamental diagnosis of the human condition. What is actually wrong with us? What needs to be fixed?
Are we broken and in need of healing? Or are we just, off track and in need of guidance?
Yes. Third, it defines the very meaning of salvation's soteriology. What are we being saved from? And more importantly, what are we being saved for? And finally, all of this reveals the ultimate purpose of creation itself.
Wow. Okay, so that makes the stakes incredibly high, because if we find two contradictory visions of that final perfect state.
The logical consequence, as the sources argue, is that you have contradictory accounts of God and contradictory accounts of humanity. The two revelations cannot both simultaneously derive from the same consistent divine source.
So we have to treat this comparison as a matter of logic and structural integrity, not just feelings or aesthetics.
That's the only way the test works.
All right, let's start by diving deep into the Christian vision then. The sources seem to focus on two defining pillars here, communion and transformation.
That's right. And the first pillar is all about the focus of the reward itself.
Heaven is fundamentally theocentric. It's God-centered.
That is the absolute starting point for any analysis of the Christian position in the source material. The essence of Christian heaven is not, an idyllic garden or just a restful place. It is God's immediate presence.
Which the theological tradition calls the beatific vision.
The beatific vision, it's
Okay.
direct, unhindered, intuitive communion with God himself.
And the scriptural foundation for this is really clear, isn't it? The source material cites Revelation.
Oh, absolutely. Revelation 21, verse 3. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them. And then, even more crucially, chapter 22, verse 4, they will see his face.
They will see his face. That's about as direct as it gets.
It is. And the critical intellectual distinction here, one that often gets missed in, popular discussions, is that God is not just the means to get other created pleasures.
He's not the vending machine for heavenly goods.
Exactly. The scholarship is insistent on this point. God is the reward itself. All the other good things, joy, activity, seeing loved ones again, all of that exists, but it's secondary, it's derivative.
So it flows from the presence of God. It doesn't replace him as the main event.
It can't. Those things don't precede or replace him as the central source of all joy.
Okay, let's unpack that term, the beatific vision, because for a lot of people that just sounds very abstract. What does seeing God's essence actually, entail?
It's described as the highest possible form of intellectual and spiritual fulfillment. The sources trace this tradition all the way back to early church figures like Augustine.
Right, in his Confessions in City of God.
Yes. Augustine's big argument was that sin is fundamentally the misdirection of desire. It's placing created things above the creator.
Loving the gift more than the giver.
Perfectly put. So for Augustine, heaven must be the restoration of the proper ordo amoris, the right ordering of our loves. Perfect happiness is finally achieved when the soul finds its complete rest in the creator.
It's like a recalibration of the soul's internal GPS system. It was pointing at all these little things on earth, and now it's pointed directly at the ultimate destination.
That's a fantastic analogy. And then Thomas Aquinas comes along and he systematizes all of this. He builds a clear philosophical structure around it.
What does he add?
He makes this really sharp distinction between imperfect happiness, which he says is possible in this life, through knowing and loving God indirectly, and perfect beatitude.
The real deal.
The real deal, which can only consist in the intellect's direct, immediate vision of God's essence. His logic is simple. If God is infinite good, then only knowing him infinitely can satisfy the soul completely.
Anything less would leave you wanting.
Always. So for Aquinas, bodily goods, all the pleasures of paradise, they're just concomitants. They're things that accompany the joy, but they are entirely secondary to the essence of happiness, which is found only in the divine essence.
Okay, so if the ultimate reward is this transformation of the soul through communion with God, we have to ask about the other half of us. What happens to the human body in all of this?
And that brings us to the second pillar of the Christian vision, the state of the resurrected body.
Christianity affirms bodily resurrection. That's central. But the body is always described as being glorified and transformed.
This transformation is the core concept of transcendence in the Christian vision. It's what distinguishes the final state from just being, a perfected physical life on earth. The difference between our mortal body and the resurrected body is ontological. It's a change in our very being.
The Apostle Paul clarifies this really powerfully in 1 Corinthians 15, which the source material leans on heavily.
He does. He says the body is sown perishable, but raised imperishable. Sown in dishonor, but raised in glory. Sown a natural body, raised a spiritual body.
That phrase, a spiritual body, is so important.
It's vital. And it doesn't mean non-physical. That would be leaning into Gnosticism, a heresy that says matter is evil. No, it means a body that is perfected, it's real, but it's entirely directed by the Spirit.
So it's no longer governed by things like decay, mortality, or those appetites that define our mortal existence.
Right. Those appetites are often categorized as fallen appetites. The resurrected body is not an intensification of the fallen body. It's a perfected one. It's fundamentally changed in its orientation and its capabilities. It's a body that's capable of fully participating in the beatific vision without distraction.
And this transformation has massive implications for our earthly social structures, which Jesus himself talks about directly. And this is where the structural contrast we're looking for really starts to sharpen.
It absolutely does. The sources cite this one teaching as decisive on the matter of whether earthly structures continue into the resurrection.
You're talking about the Sadducees.
Yes, The Sadducees, who didn't even believe in the resurrection, they come to Jesus with this ridiculous hypothetical.
About the woman who had 7 husbands, tried to trap him by asking whose wife she'll be in the afterlife.
And Jesus just cuts straight through the noise. He doesn't even engage the hypothetical. He gives the underlying theological principle saying, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven.
Matthew 22.30. That's a bombshell.
It is. And the sources interpret this to mean that earthly institutions tied to mortality and procreation cease.
Why? What's the logic there?
Because the primary function of marriage and sexuality in the broader created order is generative. It's to replenish the species because we die. If death is conquered, that whole generative order is no longer necessary.
So the institution of marriage itself ceases to have its primary utility.
Or necessity. And the scholarly consensus, especially following figures like Augustine, is that the absence of marriage is not a loss. It's not a deprivation, like something good is being taken away.
It's a fulfillment.
It's a profound fulfillment. The earthly institution of marriage pointed towards something greater. Faithful union, self-giving love. When a person achieves direct union with God, the sign is transcended by the reality it was pointing to all along.
It's like you don't need a map of the city once you're standing in the city square.
That's it, exactly. And Aquinas reinforces this. He says sexual relations pertain to the generative order. When the body is perfected beyond that need, when death is gone, that specific economy of relationship is complete. It yields to an elevated, transcendent existence defined by a new kind of relationality to God and the community of the saints, not by biological requirements.
And this leads directly to the core anthropological conclusion. If the body is transformed and institutions tied to procreation stop, what is the ultimate diagnosis of humanity's spiritual condition?
The Christian tradition diagnoses the fundamental human problem not just as, individual bad actions, but as disordered love, the famous ordo amoris.
Right. We are designed to love God first and foremost, but we chronically, consistently misdirect our affections toward finite, created goods instead.
It's like, let's use an analogy to make ordo amoris more tangible. Imagine your ultimate goal is to reach the sun, which is God.
Okay.
But you keep stopping along the way to worship the streetlights you see. You stop for created goods like money or status or even just satisfying an appetite.
You haven't just failed on your journey. You've fundamentally mistaken the streetlight for the star.
That's an excellent analogy. So salvation, in this view, is the process of healing and reordering that desire. It's about turning our affections back toward God as the ultimate, non-contingent good.
And in heaven, that healing is complete.
It's complete. Desire is transfigured. It's no longer oriented to bodily consumption or accumulation or finite relationships as ends in themselves. Pleasure absolutely still exists, but the sources emphasize it's relational, it's worship-oriented. You see this in the scenes of cosmic worship in the book of Revelation, and it is entirely God-centered.
It's not appetite-centered.
Not at all. The fundamental drive for physical satisfaction is completely re-aimed, reoriented toward communion with the divine.
Okay, so now we have to pivot. Let's look at the Islamic vision of the afterlife, Jannah, or paradise. The source material says this is where we'll see themes of reward, recompense, and embodied continuity.
Yes, and this is where the structural differences begin to seem, truly irreconcilable.
Right, so if the Christian system is focused on the transformation of our nature, the Islamic eschatology primarily presents paradise as reward and recompense for obedience.
The entire framework is defined by a moral economy of merit and divine generosity.
And the Quranic descriptions reflect this. They heavily emphasize sensory details, framing them as tangible incentives for living a righteous life right now.
They do. The sources cite frequent references to lush gardens, refreshing shade, flowing rivers of water, milk, and honey, fine silks, absolute comfort. It's all there in various surahs.
And the structural difference, as noted by the academic comparison, is in the framing of that ultimate enjoyment.
It is. Jannah is described less as union with God himself. There's no explicit concept that's equivalent to the beatific vision, and more as what God grants to the righteous.
So while God's mercy and his approval are, of course, central, the ultimate enjoyment that's emphasized in the descriptions is the granting of perfect goods by a generous divine source.
And this leads us directly to that other pillar, embodied continuity. Unlike the Christian emphasis on an ontological transformation that moves beyond generative necessity, the classical Islamic sources consistently portray the afterlife as very much embodied and sensory.
So the idea is that the body is perfected, no more sickness, no more aging, but the needs of the body, the appetites, they continue, only now they're met perfectly and perpetually.
Exactly. The dominant classical interpretation affirms an ongoing corporeality rather than a transcendence of bodily appetites. And to understand this, we have to turn to the tradition of tafsir,
The classical exegesis of the Quran.
which the sources rely on very heavily. We have to look at how the tradition itself has interpreted these texts over the centuries.
Let's spend some time on these key exegetes then, because they're not minor voices. I mean, these are figures who shape the understanding for the entire tradition.
Absolutely. Foundational figures like Al-Abari and Al-Qurubi are critical. They frequently affirmed the plain, the literal, the very concrete sense of the paradise descriptions.
So they weren't looking for some deeper metaphorical layer that would supersede the physical description.
No, not in the way some later, more philosophical schools might. They took the texts at face value. They emphasized that the rewards God provides for righteous deeds are, in fact, tangible goods and lawful enjoyment. This literal reading became the established mainstream interpretation.
And their methodology is important here. They insisted that God meant precisely what he said about the flowing rivers and the fine fabrics.
Yes. And then you have Ibn Kathir, another hugely influential exegete who reiterates this continuity of bodily experience in paradise. The body is perfected, sure, it will never tire or grow ill, but the focus remains firmly on the perpetual, flawless fulfillment of human desire under divine sanction.
Not the transcendence of that desire.
Not the transcendence of the desire itself. And that anthropological perspective is crucial. In this framework, desire is seen as something more or less morally neutral that has to be regulated in this life to keep it lawful.
And then it's perpetually satisfied in the next life.
Right. As opposed to something that must be ontologically healed or re-aimed at an infinite object, as we saw in the Christian model.
And the sources are very explicit that this continuity extends into the realm of, well, the fulfillment of desire, specifically sexual fulfillment.
Yes, which occupies a central place in many of the descriptions of paradise.
We see Quranic passages describing companions in idealized physical terms, and the widely cited hadith literature, the sayings of the Prophet, elaborates in really expensive detail on paradise as a realm of lawful, ongoing physical enjoyment, which is granted as a reward for earthly piety.
And the key structural point here is that these desires are defined as positive, eternal goods. They are not presented as temporary concessions to human weakness, nor are they just metaphors for some kind of spiritual joy.
They are a fundamental, perpetual part of the reward structure itself.
They are. Sexual desire is satisfied perpetually and perfectly. It is not transcended.
And that distinction, perpetual satisfaction versus transcendence, that feels like the theological fault line we're looking for.
It really is.
So if the Christian system says you no longer need marriage because you are now in direct union with the source of all love, this system seems to say your needs are not transcended. They are perfectly met and continued forever as part of your compensation.
The two goals for human biology are, from a structural standpoint, diametrically opposed. And this reward structure also manifests in a very clear system of hierarchy, status, and moral economy within Jannah.
Right. Unlike the unified focus on the beatific vision that we saw in the Christian account, the Islamic paradise is frequently depicted as tiered.
Yes. The sources note distinct ranks and stations that correspond directly to the merit and the quality of the righteous deeds a person performed on earth. There are passages that separate the foremost from the companions of the right hand.
Which reinforces that concept of paradise functioning as a very specific moral economy.
Exactly. Righteous deeds yield proportionate rewards. And that doesn't just include comfort and pleasure, but also honor and status. The classical tradition even speaks of attendants serving the blessed, which implies a kind of societal structure.
That element of hierarchy and status is another major structural difference. It suggests that even in the ultimate state, your relationship to others is partly defined by your past merit and your achieved rank.
Whereas the Christian concept emphasizes that singular, shared joy of the beatific vision, which unites all the saved in the same ultimate object of contemplation, regardless of past status.
Okay, so we've established the two models. Now we have to do the synthesis. This is the direct comparative test.
Right. And the sources classify these divergences not as, minor cultural differences or just complementary ways of saying the same thing. They classify them as mutually exclusive structural models of humanity's final end.
Let's slow this down and really dedicate some time to this comparison, point by point. We need to make the conceptual distance between these two systems into a clear, tangible contrast for you listening.
We can map the structural schism in 5 critical areas. Let's start with the essence of heaven paradise. In Christianity, the essence is communion with God, the direct vision of his face. In Islam, the essence is reward from God, the perfect enjoyment of the goods that he grants.
The central joy follows directly from that. For Christianity, the central joy is God himself as the source of infinite happiness. For Islam, it is the granted pleasures, the perfect sensory, material, and social goods. It's a difference in the actual object of joy.
Then we have the anthropological state of the person receiving this. The human being's final form is transformed in the Christian view, raised a spiritual body, healed of disordered desire.
And the classical Islamic view, the final form is one of enhanced continuity, a perfected, tireless but fundamentally physical body with its appetite still intact.
Which leads to the most explicit structural contradiction the sources highlight: marriage and sexuality.
In Christianity, as Christ taught in Matthew 22, marriage is absent in the resurrection state. It's rooted in the cessation of that generative necessity.
And in the Islamic interpretation, it is present and perpetual. It's a core aspect of continuous bodily fulfillment and reward.
This point is absolutely critical for the coherence test.
It is. If we accept the premise that both revelations come from a perfectly consistent divine source, that source cannot state two mutually exclusive outcomes for human biology and societal structure in the perfect eternal state.
You can't say the perfect state is one without marriage, and simultaneously say the perfect state is one where marriage and that kind of fulfillment are perpetual rewards.
It's a logical inversion of the final purpose of humanity. It just doesn't compute.
And this brings us to the moral trajectory that defines what salvation even is.
Right. In Christianity, the ultimate trajectory is the healing and transcendence of desire, that reordering of love, the ordo amoris.
Whereas in Islam, it is the regulation and perpetual satisfaction of desire fulfillment as a form of recompense.
The system where the disorder is healed and the system where the desire is perfectly met are aiming at two completely different goals for the human person.
In the sources, by focusing on these contrasts, they argue really strongly that these are not just variations on a theme. They represent two fundamentally distinct theological architectures. So, okay, this is getting really deep and, it feels like a perfect place to pause for just a moment. If this kind of in-depth exploration into theological and academic coherence resonates with you, and if you're seeking to deepen your own understanding of these core religious structures,
then we really encourage you to check out opportunities for further learning, gaining knowledge quickly but thoroughly, finding those aha moments, and having that clear structure is exactly what we aim to provide you with here.
And it's what you can find through dedicated learning. We want to make high-quality theological and structural education accessible to everyone, regardless of where you live or your current level of training.
So please, get free Bible College online in your inbox, Tyrannus Hall Bible College, thbc-https://shop.beacons.aa Kenny 2020 Tall Bible College.
That's right. There is no need to travel hundreds of miles to go to college. All you need is your phone and an internet connection. You can start today and tell all your friends. This kind of knowledge is really essential for understanding the structural foundations of faith and the claims made by different traditions.
Also, check this link, https://beacons.aa 2020 philanthropy to support our village outreach. We'll be back to discuss the deep implications of these structural contrasts for human nature and the character of God right after this.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've just laid out the structural schism between these two eschatological visions. Now we have to talk about what those differences actually imply for a fundamental understanding of humanity itself.
This is the anthropological divergence, the idea that the two systems are based on opposing root diagnoses of the human condition.
Right. In the Christian view, as we discussed, the diagnosis centers on disordered desire. Humanity's deepest problem isn't just behavioral. It's a foundational misdirection of love, the ordo amoris.
So heaven, therefore, must be the completion of that healing process. It's about transforming the soul and the body to love God supremely.
And to reiterate, earthly desires, while they're good in creation, they are finite goods. They point beyond themselves.
And the ultimate state requires them to be transcended because they simply cannot constitute infinite fulfillment. I mean, think about it. If a finite thing could provide infinite happiness, God wouldn't be necessary as the ultimate object of desire.
By contrast, the Islamic view, as is reflected in the classical tafsir, it treats desire very differently.
It does. It's largely seen as morally neutral, something that requires regulation and management in this life to make sure it stays lawful, but it doesn't require an ontological transformation to be perfected.
So paradise, in that sense, perfects and perpetuates desire as a lawful reward. The body's needs and its structure aren't abolished or superseded. They're just met without any limitation or negative consequence.
So, if the ultimate goal of the human is defined by the end state, one system implies that the fundamental nature of humanity must be changed in order to be saved.
While the other implies that the fundamental nature of humanity must be fulfilled in order to be saved. And those are two completely opposing ideas of what human fulfillment even looks like.
And the sources conclude pretty unequivocally that these anthropologies cannot both be true simultaneously if they claim to come from the same consistent divine source. They propose fundamentally opposing root diagnoses of the human condition and what constitutes final beatitude.
And that divergence carries directly into the definition of salvation itself. This is the soteriological implication. Is salvation about participation, or is it about compensation?
Christian salvation is defined as participatory. The purpose of the entire drama of faith is for humanity to become partakers of the divine nature, which is a direct quote from 2 Peter.
So it culminates in union with God, the beatific vision, which, as scholars note, is intrinsically linked to Christology and the incarnation itself. The ultimate purpose isn't just to be near God, it's to participate in his life.
Yes. Islamic salvation, in this comparative framework, is compensatory. It's a divine transaction based on a reckoning of deeds, which are then rewarded by divine generosity.
So it culminates in recompense goods granted, comfort secured, and status achieved. It's defined by what the giver bestows upon the obedient servant.
The core of the argument here is that the ends differ in kind, not just in degree. As Aquinas insisted, God himself is the essence of happiness in the Christian tradition.
And the sources argue that this leaves absolutely no room for a reward-centered eschatology, defined by finite created goods, to be co-ultimate with a communion-centered eschatology, defined by the infinite, uncreated God.
They are aiming at two entirely different definitions of beatitude.
And this is where we reach the apex of the academic argument. We're moving past anthropology and soteriology to the ultimate question.
The theological test of divine consistency. If the final structures of the afterlife are so divergent, what does that say about the very character of the God who supposedly revealed them both?
Let's focus on that central object of fulfillment. God is the final object of enjoyment. In Christianity, this is the non-negotiable principle.
It has to be. God is the ultimate fulfillment. Nothing surpasses or replaces him as the object of joy. The beatific vision ensures that heaven is the complete logical intensification of God-centeredness.
The logic is pretty rigorous. If anything created, a perfect meal, a perfect home, a perfect spouse, if that could provide ultimate, eternal, non-contingent joy, then that created thing would be, by definition, equivalent to God.
And Christian theology holds that only the Creator can satisfy the created soul.
In Islam, while God's mercy is, of course, absolute central and the ultimate source of all good things, the sources note that the Quranic portrayals of paradise emphasize what God gives, the material rewards, more than God himself as the object of enjoyment in that same intellectual and relational sense as the beatific vision.
And the structural argument here is powerful. A God who reveals himself as the supreme, all-encompassing, necessary good, the final object of the soul's desire, without whom there is no rest. He cannot also logically reveal a heaven where the primary fulfillment is defined by created gratification.
No matter how elevated or perfect that gratification is.
Exactly. It implies two different ultimate standards for fulfillment, which is a contradiction.
And this brings us right back to the foundational test of revelation and non-contradiction. The very nature of a divine source relies on coherence.
Absolutely. The Christian scripture insists on divine coherence. God is not a God of confusion from 1 Corinthians, and from Titus, God cannot lie. This is the bedrock theological principle that mandates consistency across all of God's revelations.
So let's follow the logic. If God revealed in the gospel tradition in Matthew 22 that the eternal state involves no marriage and a transformation that transcends the sexual economy because death has been defeated,
then, by that very principle of non-contradiction, he cannot later reveal that the eternal state is defined by ongoing, perpetual bodily gratification and sexual fulfillment.
because that would negate or fundamentally invert the ultimate meaning of the human end that was previously revealed.
The argument is that progressive revelation is meant to clarify, to deepen, and to complete the story that came before. It's supposed to move from shadow to substance.
It is not supposed to invert the fundamental destination or the diagnosis of what is wrong with the human soul,
A change in the telos implies a change in the revelatory source itself.
which culminates in the academic synthesis, structural evidence of different sources. The analysis of these divergent heavens leads the source material to its final, and really its unavoidable conclusion.
The structural divergence, transformation, and communion on one side versus continuity and reward on the other, it's not superficial, it's profound. And it implies a difference in 4 key architectural components.
Different conceptions of God,
Different anthropologies,
different soteriologies.
and different ultimate purposes of creation.
The sources conclude that these differences are so foundational, they go to the very core organizing principles of each system, that any attempt to harmonize them would require abandoning the integrity of one system or the other.
You simply cannot reconcile a heaven where desire is ontologically transcended with one where desire is eternally and perpetually satisfied. They are mutually exclusive goals.
Therefore, based solely on this rigorous eschatological comparison.
The two systems, Christianity and Islam, cannot originate from the same truthful and consistent divine source. They describe 2 entirely different goals for humanity, making their theological foundations mutually exclusive.
Wow. This has been a true deep dive into the telos of these 2 major traditions. We've gone from abstract concepts like the beatific vision and Ordo Amoris to very concrete differences in institutional structure.
We've contrasted Christianity's emphasis on transformation, communion, and the transcendence of finite desire.
With Islam's emphasis on reward, comfort, and the perpetual satisfaction of regulated, embodied desire.
And the core lesson here for you, the learner, is to see how deeply intertwined our religion's view of the afterlife is with its core understanding of human nature and the very character of God. The end reveals the beginning, the diagnosis, and the cure.
And this structural approach allows for a really rigorous academic comparison. So what does this all mean for your critical thinking moving forward?
Well, this deep dive into eschatology raises an important question that builds on the structural analysis we've done. It's something for you to mull over.
Okay.
If the goal of human existence is truly defined by the final state, which model better accounts for the disordered nature of desire that we all observe in the present world? The need for a profound ontological healing or the need for perpetual reward and management?
So which diagnosis of our current condition makes more sense in light of the proposed cure?
Exactly. That critical point of diagnosis is what you should continue to think about.
A truly thought-provoking way to end this discussion. Thank you for joining this deep dive. If this academic exploration sparked further curiosity in you, we invite you to continue your learning journey and delve deeper into these foundational subjects.
This foundational knowledge is just essential for understanding the world and the claims of different religious traditions.
Visit Get Free Bible College online in your inbox, Tyrannus Hall Bible College, thpc-https.shop.beacons.aka 2020 Tyrannus Hall Bible College.
And remember, there's no need to travel hundreds of miles to go to college. All you need is your phone and an internet connection. You can start today and tell all your friends.
Also, please check this link, https.beacons.aka 2020 philanthropy, to support our village outreach. We really appreciate you diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.